Hello, everybody.
Yes, you guessed it.
Ah,
Let's talk about my.
what was that? Hey, everyone, can you hear me? Can you see me? What's good? Are you there? I can't even find the chat in this thing. There's the chat.
Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Yes, you guessed it.
Ah,
Let's talk about my.
okay. So there's a delay. Patrick T and Steam is very exciting. I love your content from afar for many months. Now that this year in January, I discovered my prime. All right. Very good. Hola. Hello. How are you all? Let me refresh this screen here. Um, hello. If you can put some emojis, a potato emoji, from that last video, trying to stay topical. Um, welcome everybody. I got to get started soon because it's the live is going to be probably like around a good 50 minutes. But let's. Oh, Hasani, you're here. Um, hello. Your questions were fantastic. Questions about the workbook, questions about that video. I'll just start up the questions in just a few minutes. I think I got all my ducks in a row. Quack, quack. I've got my questions ready and prepped. Yeah. Anybody got some good music recommendations, some good book recommendations that I can hold on to in the chat? Any content suggestions that you would like to see? Next video coming up is has anyone been watching the series on toxic dads, toxic dads, their effect on daughters, toxic mothers, their effect on sons? The next one is going to be toxic mothers and their effect on daughters. And I got to get writing that and kind of get that out to you guys soon. It's going to be a shorter video than the other ones because those videos I'm might be repeating some of it because the concepts in it are very much the same. Have you guys been? Did you get anyone see those? Were they helpful? Cool, cool. We got about every question about siblings. Yeah, it's been a while since I did some work on siblings. Um, hello from the UK, and yes, there is a video I would like to do. Is there's kind of a feeling or some statements and they're good. I'm not criticizing them, but some clinicians will say no child is from the same family, and I think that that's more nuanced. I think that that is. I think I know what they mean by that when it comes to siblings. Like the baby might have a different experience than the oldest, and that kind of a thing. But that statement, like no child has the same set of parents from the same family, it's kind of confusing because it's not always it's more nuanced. It's not always true. Like you can have multiple siblings going like, yes, mom was a rager and she wasn't sort of safe. So it kind of is, that statement is a little too literal for me or something like that, if I'm making sense to anybody. You have five siblings who prefer to have no relationships with any of the others. That also tells a family story. Siblings would be a good one. None of my six siblings, where'd that thing go, are friends with any of the others. It really takes a lot of like really healthy, good parenting, and even that is not always a guarantee for siblings to really get on with each other. But I think if we're coming from a family that encourages love and connection in a good enough way, there's more of that. I find in the dysfunctional family or the abusive family or um, that kind of thing, it's sort of every child. I learned this from my mentor. Every child has to figure out how to survive, and a lot of that involves not being connected. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, it would be a great video to do. um, so we are going to read some questions about the workbook and the video. Let me find you that workbook. This is the workbook that was recently published. We're going to be answering questions about that, as well as we're going to be answering questions about a recent video, which is how to recover from narcissistic abuse. I had a lot of fun with that video, and incorporated three ideas that I actually learned in my own from my mentor years and years ago about that's general. There's a lot of RRP the relationship recovery process in that video, like the stepping in for your inner child, the truth statement, as well as why am I blanking? The truth statement, stepping for your inner child, and the give it back game. So yep, Ingrid, also Ingrid Clayton just wrote that book. I'm glad you caught that video. She's wonderful. I really hope her book is doing well. And I don't have a lot of time tonight. We got about a good 50 minutes. So let me get my questions out. But yeah, let me just want to read some more of the chat. Anybody, okay, besides some siblings, any other content ideas that you would like to see? And I'm sorry if like there's a lot going on in the chat. Zero parenting. I'd love to see collaborations with Healthy Gamer. I love him. I did a collaboration with him. I think it was part of the Psych to Go. So there is a collaboration with Dr. K. He's a wonderful guy. Really, really like him. His channel is just really packed with really great stuff. I really, really appreciate that guy. So I definitely would love to do another collaboration with him. Been watching, reading for years. Thank you. Looking for a new mom and daughter series that's coming up. Love the workbook. Thank you so much. Emojis. I'm on this. I can't read the emojis. I'm on this like Restream app. And I can only see, when like the, the emoji says blue smiling face, a lot of like, colons and, semicolons. But I can see those later. Yeah. So general kind of siblings would be good. Processing grief. Oh boy. Essentially, it's weird. This is going to come up in one of the questions, but it's a lot like all childhood trauma work is grief work. And grieving in two levels. And again, this is what I learned from my mentor, Amanda Curtin, is that we grieve the family that we got, like having a narcissistic mom or abuse or shut down parents or whatever, and then grieving the family that we needed. So there's a twofold kind of thing there. And I have a big opinion about grief is that grief is a process that it goes faster if we have witnesses, like being in a group. Excuse me. And sort of almost like even like the when we lose somebody, when someone has passes away and there's witnesses about people being around us at a wake or a funeral or however we kind of memorialize people, that kind of a thing. So it is a multi-layered kind of process. I think that grief on our own can feel directionless and kind of slow. It can be a lot like, what am I kind of doing here? So really with either a good group or good therapist, I'm a group therapist. I prefer groups with your peers because it really humanizes everything. Okay, ready for the questions? Should we just dive into it? Questions about the video, questions about the book? Okay. All right, here we go. Well, I got a question here. Is group work more beneficial for CP healing as opposed to individual therapy? If it's a childhood trauma group, like if you just show up to any old group, like if you go to a DBT group, that's more present focus and emotional regulation, it can be triggering in some therapies that don't get into childhood trauma. So if you don't know that up front, it can feel kind of like, when do we get to the thing? And the group isn't about that. But group is not for everybody, but I find most of the healing gains in my experience happen in a group. Some people might need like a good couple years of individual therapy before considering a group. Everyone is a little bit freaked out about group, but if you're like super activated by a group, might not be the right time. Any familiarity or opinion on the VA's PTSD program for I used to work at the VA. I was an inpatient. I worked inpatient acute psychiatry at the Department of Veteran Affairs. I was there for about 3 years. And CPS, cognitive processing therapy, is pretty good, but it's kind of still a top-down cerebral kind of therapy, and it may or may not lead to a lot of emotional stuff. So I don't really, it's almost like this could be incorrect, but I glump a little bit of cognitive processing therapy in with CBT, like kind of handouts and talking about things, where the kind of childhood trauma work that I did in a group was kind of very cathartic, sobbing, talking, recreating traumatic experiences kind of stuff. And the VA, for good and bad reasons, sometimes doesn't want to go there in a way to not upset vets further. So, Hosanna, thank you for your service, female Army veteran. Everyone say hello to Hosanna and thank her for her service if you feel like doing that. Regardless of how you kind of lean, thank you for that service. I love working with veterans. It was that job. That job was a little bit like, it's like trying to do therapy at the post office. Like it just wasn't. There's a lot of problems with it. And it actually, in another video, let me know would anyone like a video on my thoughts on acute psychiatry, like locked psych units and the benefits and the problems, if anyone has sort of experienced them, or would, even if you hadn't, would that be interest? What about mushrooms and psychedelics? I don't have a lot of opinions or thought about it. I would just do it with someone who knows what they're doing. Okay, so I got to answer the questions that were submitted and prepped. Thank you for your service. In the video on narcissism, you talk about giving it back, which I like, but why not do this with my actual parents? Wouldn't it be more empowering in person than to do it with an empty chair or something like that in therapy? So for those that don't know, in the video about narcissism and the giving it back is kind of something that we say, we write down a statement in our mind, the giving it back. I'm giving you back my fear of people. I'm giving you back my feelings of always being in trouble at work. These belong to you and your crappy parenting. So it's that kind of a thing. You can check out the video. Did I put the video in the chat? There's the video again. And I also talk about this in the workbook. Why I wouldn't do it in front of parents in general, whether it's when I'm talking about a letter or I'm talking about the give it back game, is if people want to take on their abusive parents and really speak the truth to them, I encourage them to maybe do that just once, because sometimes we can get into a battle with them and want to keep trying to get them to see that their stepmother that they brought into your life was really not safe, and you're kind of duking it out, battling it with that can be involved in our codependency. And I know what you mean, but it's where you're not with a very toxic parent or emotionally immature parent. It most likely isn't going to land. And the other weird thing around this is kind of mind-blowing and maybe a little bit controversial depending on where you're at in processing, is I don't think it's healthy for us to like bring our stuff to our parents in a way that we don't really necessarily want to bring our rage there. Because check this out. Raise your hand if you relate to this. Your parents didn't protect you from their rage or their other emotions. So we also don't want to keep continuing that kind of pattern of making them get it. Not everybody's wired like that, but it wouldn't really be more empowering for a bunch of reasons. Is most likely it's not going to work out so well. You might feel good about sort of saying it, but when you walk away, it's like nothing, it really tends to get through to an emotionally abusive parent or highly immature parent or a very limited parent. So that's and I would encourage people to do it in an empty chair in therapy, or do it with your inner child, or do it sort of on your own. But that exercise, giving it back, is also an ongoing idea. Like when you're triggered at work and you're triggered by an email from your boss, you can say in your mind is like, I'm giving you back my imposter syndrome. And that's how that works. So hopefully that makes sense. But essentially for two reasons. It's not good to bring our stuff to our family, even though that sounds ridiculous, where they should be the place to take it. But we want to protect them from our own sort of trauma, even if they caused it. If that sounds bananas to you, and I understand if that's confusing. And the other thing is just like, raise your hand out there. If you're going to have a big conversation with your parents, you probably have. How did it go? Thank you very much. It's very generous of you, VJ95. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, in the chat, how does it tend to go when you want to talk to your parent about what they were around their neglect or their emotions or how they treated you or how they're still treating you now? Tends to, that's the reason why we're all here right now, is those conversations tend to not go very far. So there's that question. Cool. Second question. You talked about your own father, who was similar to my own, who said I'd be working McDonald's jobs for life. So in that video, I put a segment in that video where I'm talking about my dad, who would say stuff like, I'm just going to work with my hands for my life. And the person says, I work good jobs now, but I feel like I've lied to get them. Does that poor self-esteem ever leave? And how did you get there? It does eventually leave. And in that video, here's the video again. In that video, and in the workbook itself, I talk about lasting narratives. So my dad would tell me that, you should probably work with your hands. He did not mean brain surgeon or rocket science or whatever. He meant laborer because I wasn't a very good student. But in addition, the man didn't know who I was. So that's all in the video. But doing the exercises about, does that poor self-esteem ever leave? The true statement, the give it back, the stepping in for your inner child is the actual ongoing work, where a lot of that video and the workbook, put it in the chat, right? Again, a lot of the chapters in this workbook and the video are about dismantling those lasting narratives. So even when I start, when I was practicing, in doing groups and doing individual, when I would start a group with people, I would tell them that group is an opportunity to figure out if your parents were right or wrong about you. Raise your hand if your inner child still feels, or put something in the chat, if your inner child still feels like your parents were right about you in some way, that maybe you're not that smart. And I'm not saying you're totally agreeing with them. I'm just saying it's like a lasting, total thing. And what am I trying to sort of say there is that we're trying to dismantle these narratives through the work that we're kind of doing. So the self-esteem does kind of come back, but it's a result of deciding that your parent was wrong about you. And then how do you do that? Is, a part of that for me was really recognizing I knew my father was really off even in childhood, but in therapy that really became clear to me. So doing a lot of work on myself, and I needed a lot of help from a therapist to really kind of say that, your father was kind of a bastard. He didn't know you. He had big opinions about you. And those big opinions only served him. So when the author of this question, you talked about your father, who was similar to my own, who said I'd be working McDonald's jobs for the rest of my life. I work good jobs now, but I feel like I've lied to get them. Part of that narrative, so it's like imposter syndrome, who relates to that as well. Part of that narrative is also kind of about this. How do I explain this? A toxic parent, very much a narcissistic parent, has contempt for their child, that their child is kind of a liar. Even who comes from a family of, this comes up in another question, who grew up in a family out there that doesn't believe that anyone has good integrity? Sarcastic, contemptuous, like I came from a family where like my parents would look at the neighbor across the street and like, why does he get to have a house like that? Like just kind of miserable. And we can have a miserable parent kind of teach their kid, I mean, really in small ways. I've seen parents like just in small ways, just really kind of attack a kid's integrity, attack a kid's goodness. That a parent who is narcissistic or is really nasty or miserable can really sour our goodness or integrity. So we might work at jobs where we feel like we don't deserve it. But the work is going to be about, I do deserve it. I've done the work. I've got the degree. I'm a good employee, that kind of a thing. It doesn't work unless you say the context of the other stuff, of how the parent was, the true statement about like, I struggle with this issue because you were a shitty parent who believed that I was just like a sketchy little kid when I was a good kid. So it's a lot of that, discussing with our inner child and those ideas. So yes, the poor self-esteem, I know what you mean. It does eventually leave, but it's a lot of ongoing work with our inner child, as well as work in therapy around, really, it's what we're really talking about in this workbook, again, is holding parents accountable. So when you get the email and you feel like you're a fraud, an email from your boss or from HR, and you feel like you're in trouble, that kind of a thing, is the work in real time is holding the parent accountable for how they told you that you were like a sketchy, lying kid, and you feel that way. It could go that way, or you might have absorbed that the parents behaved in sketchy ways and you may by proxy feel that way as well. So hopefully that made sense to you. Third question. In that recent video, thank you for it, by the way, you talked about perception, where we have issues in intimacy like trust or taking things the wrong way. I love this question. Everyone pay attention to this because it's like the root of what it means to be triggered, especially around perception, which I talk a lot about both in the workbook, in the video. But what happens when your perception is right, but you maybe don't trust it, or maybe it doesn't matter? Like, my partner doesn't share their feelings and I always assume it's about me. Who relates to that? Like, my partner doesn't share their feelings and I always assume that it's about me. Thank you again, VJ95, very generous of you. My perception is right that they don't share their feelings, and it certainly happens when I ask them about it. So it is about me. What is it that I'm right about? Lol. So when we get triggered, in other words, and I hope I don't trigger people by saying this, if I have somebody who is in a nasty abusive relationship and the person is verbally abusive to them, and I might ask them about their triggers or what does it remind them of or take them back to, they might feel invalidated because they have an actual abusive partner. But I'm asking them about what does it remind them of in childhood, and to also think about not so much that people feel invalidated about triggers because it's sort of like, let's not care about your abusive partner. It just must be your issues. Am I making sense? You know what I mean? So triggering is a tricky kind of business in that way. Sometimes we're just triggered and we project. Sometimes we feel like a good enough partner is untrustworthy and they're cheating on us or whatever, right? Sometimes that partner is cheating on us. And there's a difference in those quality of triggers. What I would be asking is, what does it take you back to, and how are you maybe different? Because it takes you back to your partner doesn't share their feelings. Maybe that takes you back to in childhood of having a very moody parent who would weaponize their moods. Then my next thing would be like, how do we help your inner child see that you're different and you have power now to not care that they're making it about you? So again, to read the question, my perception is right that they don't share their feelings, and it certainly happens when I ask them, so it's about me. It could be, but the other piece to it is that we trigger other people, which is impossible to not trigger other people. But it's really the answer to this question is that it is not about you, it is about your partner's stuff mixed in with a little bit of your own. My perception is right that they don't share their feelings. Check, got it. And it certainly happens when I ask them about their feelings. Check, got it. So it's about me? No. You're requesting normal intimacy, and that probably triggers them on some level, probably to their own childhood trauma stuff. But here's the kicker. When we're in those situations, it viscerally feels like it's about you. Who has been with a partner who has been very self-righteous? This is another video topic. When people get triggered, they can become self-righteous and they can very much appear like they are 100% right. Self-righteous looks like, no, F you, it was Tuesday and you asked me and we're always talking about this and I don't even know what I'm doing and you're the one with the issues, you're the one in therapy, blah, like they talk a good game. But for people who have grown up in abuse and childhood trauma, who self-doubt themselves, self-righteous people can have a lot of power over us. Who relates to what I'm saying? I would love to know if I'm making sense, because this is its own video in itself. I said it, self-righteous people have a lot of power because they have this energy and swagger to them that if you grew up without any power, you might cave. Or if you're a fighter, you might also be a little bit self-righteous, and it's like maybe a little bit of a bad combination. So this is a lot of the work, is reclaiming our power back and seeing it as self-righteous and cutting through the fog a bit. So I hope I'm answering this question. My perception is right that they don't share their feelings, and it certainly happens when I ask them. So it's about me, which is what am I right about? You are right that they don't share their feelings. You are right that it happens when they ask you. You might not be right when your inner child decides it's about you, and your inner child needs help seeing that it's your partner's stuff. Another thing that's related to this is inner children do not see toxicity. Inner children think everyone is healthier than they are. Who relates to what I just said? Inner children thinks an inner child will think that they're the most messed up one. An inner child does not think that the self-righteous partner is a loose cannon when they actually are. So the inner child needs help, very much a lot of help getting that. So cool. I got a lot of questions to get through, and I tend to be long-winded. In the chapter about the built-in forgetter, you talk about idealizing someone, but that sabotages you. I keep forgiving my family even though they never change. Why do I do this? Am I idealizing or magical thinking? Great question. I think idealizing is kind of a magical thinking. In a really quick way out of this one is, why do you do this? Think it would be good to dialogue with your inner child. You keep forgiving your family even though they never change. Think about it in this way. What is in it for what does your inner child want out of forgiving? What is like the fantasy? And it usually looks like, I know I'm asking you to be self-reflective, but this childhood trauma stuff is really highly patternized. Inner children will forgive, or the built-in forgetter is a lot like skipping issues, replacing it with idealizing, not thinking that you have any right to want something different. Think about, what does the inner child want out of, forgiving a partner or forgiving a parent indefinitely, even then when their behavior is either abusive or hurtful. Usually what the inner child wants is to kill them with kindness and to be the better person, because they want connection and stability. So when it's our family, our inner child will perpetually, in a very long time, some people unfortunately can't get out of this, or they don't wake up out of it, and they will keep trying with their family indefinitely, because they just want, and they're not wrong, we all want this. Everyone wants a loving, stable family where they can be seen and be part of. We're not bad for wanting that. And the inner child is always going to be gambling to maybe make that happen. They are more interested in potential than reality. So that's usually what the inner child wants out of it. Think about it in that way. And then for your inner adult is sort of, does what the inner child want, does that work out? How does it go when you've like forgiven your dad for the 200th time about being late to major events in your life or something like that? Or the fights or the raging at you or the scapegoating, that kind of stuff is like, how does it tend to go when you forgive them? Other note here is, what's the alternative? Again, this is all inner child thinking about what the inner child feels. What's the alternative to forgiving them? What are you going to feel? So why do I do this? Is the inner child only thinks in terms of potential, but the inner child avoids feelings that they can't tolerate. And if we give up on abusive people, if we give up on an abusive family, then we're kind of out there free floating in the void. We're going to be in a lot of pain. We're going to feel abandoned. We're going to feel a lot of grief. Who has stayed in a relationship for those reasons? Who has stayed in a bad relationship because being single is unbearable because of attachment wounds? I was very much there in my 20s. I needed to be in a relationship. So the inner child might feel compelled to forgive the family because the alternative is to be familyless and out there, which is very painful, but this might be part of the process that the inner adult can help you handle. So I really appreciate that question. Next question. Can you talk more about the childhood emotional neglect chapter issue, but specifically around touch? My family did not believe in affection, and it's mixed in with religious trauma. I really struggle being touched and staying present. But how does naming it as what didn't happen helpful, and what's the next step? Really great question. The workbook is extremely helpful for naming these things and working with your inner child about it. I would say group therapy or intensive therapy is going to be more helpful with such a big issue, because our issues are some issues. No, I'm trying to say, like, we can do a lot of work around the insight and dialoguing with their inner child. But I was in a group therapy for like 3.5 years and then more therapy before and after that. And it took a lot of heavy lifting. So when you're asking, like, what's the next step, is to dialogue with the inner child. Well, obviously, I'm going to say, like, I really would love to see if it's if applicable and available to you. EMDR therapy or group therapy around childhood trauma can be very helpful to really get you. But what I'm getting out of the question is that, um, if you shut down around trauma, it might not be a cerebral fix where you're thinking about, oh, I'm naming it, because that doesn't really always work. It's helpful to know what our issues are, and it's very helpful to dialogue with the inner child. But the dialoguing with the inner child around this, sometimes it needs to be that the beliefs about something needs to be fixed. So let's just say you're in a relationship with someone, you struggle with touch, and it's a problem because you get distracted around a minute and a half mark of being hugged or sitting next to your partner that you love or whatever, is your body feels a barrier, or you feel uncomfortable, or alarm systems goes off, or you just kind of do kind of sneaky things, like you're on your phone and you're kind of out of there. Which makes a lot of sense. I'm not judging you or criticizing you. This is just really how this stuff works around that. I would love to hear from anybody in the chat who really kind of feels uncomfortable around touch and being close. Some of us are malnourished for it, and sometimes we want it too much. Like, that's another issue. Some of us, like, can't handle it. And to dialogue with the inner child might be dialoguing with around the beliefs before, like, making yourself try to be more present in, like, dialoguing with the beliefs, such as, like, dialoguing with your inner child, like, touch is icky. Or if it's really around neglect, it can be like the inner child saying, touch freaks me out because I don't know what to do. And then peeling back some onion layers to that is some grief around the family, but also touch feels weird because I don't know what to do. What does it say about you if you don't know how to do touch? Well, then I feel kind of like a freak. And then you can include some issues around holding parents accountable for not giving you some basics. But really, I would also really recommend EMDR or an intensive childhood trauma group therapy, where they can work with you. Another good thing is to sort of get a stuffed animal and start to just, like, reclaim touch with sleeping with a stuffed animal who represents your inner child, and trying to jumpstart a little bit of a do-over in that way. So I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. I don't really I wish I had more time to really be more explicit in what those things mean. Or like, yeah, just go do this, up two streets, take a left, do the thing. I want to be sensitive to that. It can come off as that. But dialoguing with the inner child, which is also in the workbook. Touch is huge. I would recommend some EMDR work. I would also recommend getting a stuffed animal and doing like a 2-month long program where when you go to bed, you spend about 5 or 10 minutes, internally talking with your inner child and snuggling with a teddy bear or something like that that represents your inner child. And that's probably the stuff that's really missing in your childhood. And keep if it doesn't work, keep plugging away at it. Keep asking questions. Next question. I got about a good 15-20 minutes here. In the chapter on depression, I've done most of the things you recommended at the end in the chapter: groups, medication, therapy, but it's still there. It's gotten better. I haven't done a childhood trauma group, and how is that different from a depression group? So won't spend a lot of time on this question, but it's a really great question in a way that, how do I put this? This sounds goofy, but I almost liken therapy concepts and different types of therapists to manage different problems in a car. Like, if you've done a depression group, it's most likely about insight, maybe some talk about sort of chemical stuff going on in managing symptoms. And that could be like electrical work for a mechanic or a specialized mechanic doing electrical work. Childhood trauma group is a specific thing that is like almost like the transmission guy. It's very, very different. If you haven't done a childhood trauma group, is you might have done a lot of things around managing the depression, medication, some therapy, a depression group. But, you know, RRP groups, the relationship recovery process, if anyone, let me find that real quick. This is a link to RRP therapists that we have trained. What the flip? Where'd it go? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just talking out loud. I'm trying to find a link tree. There. So many links. Yeah. Anyway, if you just Google, I'm sorry, RRP therapist, there's an Instagram page and a link tree. And if I have time, I can kind of find it. Is RRP groups are really about original pain work. It's grief work. It's experiential work where we're actually recreating dynamics of the trauma that you went through and have a different outcome. You're doing relational, interpersonal work with your other group members. You're really doing conflict work. You're doing some rage work. You're doing some focus group kind of work. So it's very different than managing like symptoms, because in here we're trying to really like sort of dismantle narratives, have some grief work going on, kind of come back to life a little bit, really look at what your inner child believes, how that inner child might run you in certain ways, how you might feel drained by other people, and have that come up in a group can be very therapeutic. That's very different than medication or general talk therapy, that kind of a thing. And it's gonna bother me, guys. So or y'all, or however I should address people. Let me find that link tree real quick. Give me 1 second. I'm stopping the whole thing. This is a link of RRP therapists that we have trained, and they are the best bet. They are separated by location. And if you do not see someone in your area, consider seeing someone who practices internationally. They are not employees. We have trained them. We don't know about their insurance and all that kind of jazz. So that needs to kind of like, those questions need to go to them. Okay, how am I doing? Breathe. Talking too much. Next question. And we're doing great. Really love this question. If you have a strong inner critic, listen to this one. I'm highly self-critical. If not, think I'm a hypocrite. This is a question that I was referencing earlier. What's the difference between honoring a trauma response and just using it as an excuse? I would love to hear from this question. Is really about, are you super highly critical of your own integrity to a ridiculous amount? Like, who believes that they're sketchy, or that when you're not? Or does your inner child really believe that you're kind of a faker or a poser or a liar? And you know what I mean? Like, it's really a hardness about yourself. I'm highly self-critical. If not, I think I'm a hypocrite. What's the difference between honoring a trauma response and just using it as an excuse? They're referencing a chapter about honoring your childhood trauma responses and coping strategies. It's one of the chapters in the book. You talk about that in the chapter about honoring the response, but it's a slippery slope in my mind. My brother is a rager and a fighter. And while he knows where it comes from, he believes it empowers him, but he can't keep relationships going longer than 6 months. I want to read that again. My brother is a rager and a fighter. While he knows where it comes from, he believes it empowers him. He can't keep relationships going longer than 6 months. Sometimes we confuse what we value or let me put it another way. That brother, he might value being a fighter. Like, no one's going to overpower me and I can use my fight response. We wouldn't be thinking in that way. Who believes that, who identifies with the fight response, and you tend to overly value telling people off? That used to be me. I was very much an upset the apple cart kind of guy. And I would definitely rock the boat, but I wouldn't do it tactfully, and I would rock the boat over. Wasn't a good time. And I think I love this question so much because it really spells out that we can overly value our fight response. Who is a fawner and overly, it's not, again, I'm not judging you. This is just stuff not by choice, but let me put it this way. Childhood trauma survivors, we tend to not know what we're like when we're triggered, and we tend to not know what we look like and behave and act like when we're in a freeze response or a fawn response or whatever. And I think that that happens because we didn't really get a lot of mirroring. So I love how the person stated that so much, that the brother is a rager and a fighter, but he overly values it. And that's dangerous because it really is going to kill intimacy, like the question is kind of spelling out. You know, like you might not know that you're a fawner and that you may overly value defaulting to people, and people might not want you giving up all their power to them. And what I mean by that is, who has a friend and you're like, let's go out for lunch and whatever, where would you like to go? They're like, wherever you want to go. I don't care, wherever you want to go. Like, and they tend to always default to you or give you a lot of power. How does that make you feel? Who has, this is even worse, when a fawner kind of believes that you're going to flip out if they state a preference. They're giving you a lot of power. They're actually projecting that you're going to be like, I want fucking Thai food, you know, like their inner child is kind of expecting that because that's how they were treated in their family. But it doesn't feel good when when someone gives up all their power. It kind of burdens us with all the power in the relationship. The person go on in that question is, I fawn and then I tell myself it was the right thing to do, especially with my boss. But isn't that just code switching to avoid being cowardly? Where is the line? Well, first of all, I love that what you just sort of said there is that we have to flip this conversation. For those who are super self-critical, it's that you were set up to fawn, your brother was set up to fight. We didn't choose these things, but we do need to take responsibility for it. But we're not, these, you know, our triggers and our trauma responses, they're not exactly a choice. They're not like, I'm going to whip out the fight response right now. They're just conditioned because we weren't safe as kids growing up. So we have to take that judgment off. And it's really, the question is really about getting your inner adult to not believe that you're a hypocrite. Of course, you may have not stated your words with your boss because you don't feel like that's safe yet. But I love that you know that, hey, I could have. I know I wasn't fully in danger there. So where is the line? The line is around how much damage to our intimacy does our trauma response create? And let's be honest about that. The damage might have been if you default to a boss and you kind of fawn in that way. The damage is you might have lost some self-respect for yourself, but I wouldn't judge yourself in the way that you're sort of saying I was a coward. So I would also say it's not safe yet, a big yet to come out of a trauma response. It's going to take a lot of work to do that. And one other thought on this question is what I mentioned earlier is that hypocritical self-judgment, inner critic kind of stuff, is that something you might have learned from your family? Because I find that if you think yourself as a hypocrite, you might have learned that from a parent who thinks everyone is a hypocrite, like I mentioned earlier, or the parent is miserable, or who grew up in a family of sarcasm. It's really a sneaky thing. Who grew up in a family that giving them a hug, someone would always have to make a weird, wacky joke, like, oh, we're all getting touchy-feely right now. You know, sarcasm, bitterness, a little bit of an edge to everything. A parent who thinks that the world is against them. That kind of stuff. So we might have learned this kind of sourness from our family. It's another thing to like the give back game, like in that video. My family was miserable, you know, like giving a hug was always like, oh, we're getting all touchy feely. It really wrecks intimacy. It really like kind of craps on the day-to-day loving life of a family. I also hate sarcasm. I can also spot like someone who is kind of miserable and like that from a mile away, and I wonder what happened to them. Like, where did they learn that? So very much appreciate that question. Okay. I got about 5 minutes before I got to go. So I'm going to do lightning fast speed round, bibbity boppity boo. Um, let me give you guys the video that I was talking about because the chat moves fast. So this is what the video that we're asking questions on or answering questions on. And we're also answering about the workbook. Incidentally, the workbook, this is the last day for its discounted pricing. It's priced at 29. I believe tomorrow it goes up to 35. I believe that was the plan. Okay, lightning fast round. And I hope that last question made sense to you. For the magical thinking chapter, I catch myself thinking maybe my parents or friend or ex will finally change if I explain myself better. I love these questions. How do I stop holding on to that hope, and where does it come from? Does the chapter explain that? I love this question so much. First of all, I want to say to you is that inner children who get caught up in thinking that they need to explain it better is you're assuming that you're the problem when it's the family's problem for not being listeners, or for not being emotionally intelligent, or for not seeing you. And it's very much a little kid thing to feel like, gee, I don't think that dad really understood that I don't feel safe. Let me tell him again, or tell him in a different way. So it's such a great question. How do I stop holding on to that hope, and where does it come from? If I explain myself better. A really great dialoguing prompt related to that chapter for you would be something like not explaining things and kind of trying to get yourself into a place that explaining better is, it's a little bit like doing the work for the other person, especially if we have an intimate relationship with them, like a partner or family. Sometimes we have to become diplomatic. If we're working with a difficult person at work, we may have to explain things till we're blue in the face. That's different where we don't have an intense or an intimate relationship with them. So it's different in that way. So I would couch it this way. When we think about accountability, when we think about, like in that video of the giving it back, that's something to give back. Mom and dad, I am giving back my tendency to overly explain because you set me up to think I had something to work with when I don't. That kind of stuff. Next question. In the chapter on guilt from going no contact, you talk about what happened before you go no contact and even make a list. But my inner child says that such a list won't matter because withdrawing from family is mean. I'm stuck. Conceptually, I understand because obviously it got bad enough for me to go no contact, but I'm now in limbo with crushing guilt. My thoughts on this is dialogue with your inner child and ask your inner child, who was really mean? How did we get here? We went no contact, and we didn't just do that because we were feeling mean. So this is really how little kids think. They tend pre-abstract thinking, pre-puberty. If you have a young inner child, they might think black and white, I'm mean for leaving. It's also wrapped up in probably the biggest issue around going no contact is guilt, along with what people think about us when we go no or low contact. So I would first dialogue about who was really mean. Let's really talk about this. The other thing I would talk about is inner children need conversations before they're able to change a belief. So if you bust out that list and they're just like, nope, we were mean, none of that really matters. You have to work with that belief that you're being mean when you're not. The other question I have is like, the other question you can have for your inner child is, what would a healthy family say about the difference between speaking the truth and being mean? And try those things. So a lot of this stuff with the inner child is having to dialogue with them and work with them before you can absorb a belief, or before you can do even if you're like, like terrified of going to your first individual therapy appointment. You might feel like you're having a panic attack. You might need to dialogue for a little bit and take the onus away from feeling like the inner child is going to be so exposed. That kind of a thing. All right, last question. Thank you so much for joining me. In the emotionally immature chapter about enmeshment, you ask, what issues do you struggle with in adulthood and relationships in context of being enmeshed as a child? Who out there was enmeshed or grew up in that kind of relationship with a parent where, and by enmeshment, I tend to think about it like, um, the parent makes you into like a surrogate spouse. Enmeshment is there's no you, it's all about the parent's emotions. Um, that kind of a thing. So it's really an experience where we really struggle with having a sense of self because it was always about the emotionally immature parent. Just checking up on something here. Where did it go? One second. Sorry, I'm just, oh, what's it doing? All right. Hopefully that makes sense. I just wanted to check out the live, make sure that you guys can hear me. You give an example because, all right, how do they, what am I doing? What issues do you struggle with in your adulthood in relationships and context of being enmeshed as a child? How do they directly relate to your immature parent? That's the question in the book. You give an example, but isn't really applicable to me and I'm stuck. Can you discuss some other examples? When we are, so if we had and if we were enmeshed with a parent, we might be conditioned in adulthood to overly feel for someone because it was kind of all about them, to the point that we might know what our own feelings are. Not knowing yourself in context of relationships, like it's, who out there relates to this, is the next line is not knowing how to be with somebody unless you're attentive and helpful. That's the top tier sign when I know someone has been enmeshed with a parent, that they don't know themselves, but they relationally don't know how to be with somebody unless they're helping them. Anyone relate to that? Not knowing where the line is about how people behave is another example. Is who also, because of being with an emotionally immature parent and being enmeshed with them, who has spent time in their life not knowing what's abusive? Who has not, childhood trauma survivors, we tend to skip when someone's being shitty to us and we just try to either react to it or fix it. And I think in the built-in forgetter chapter, I talk a lot about how inner children will skip something. And then you might have a therapist or a friend that's like, they said fucking what to you? And you kind of don't, it doesn't land with you. Like you don't know it's bad. That's a huge sign of being with a toxic parent and being enmeshed with them. Being afraid of not taking care of somebody emotionally. So those are some of the examples that I kind of give with that one. Hopefully that made sense. But I find that children who are neglected, enmeshment is a form of neglect. When we have that very tumultuous, wrapped up, enmeshed relationship. This was my relationship with my mother. I didn't know where the line was when someone was being crappy to me. I didn't know how to be with them unless I was helping them or being attentive to them. There was no me in a relationship, which is bananas when you really think about it. Not knowing where, not knowing my context of myself and just feeling anxious, you know what I mean? Like about being way, it gets really wacky when you are only aware of their emotions and not your own. So there is that. That's the live. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's just spend a minute kind of saying goodbye. I would love to hear your thoughts. I knew I was like throwing a lot at you, but is there something that was really helpful? I would love to know about it that kind of stood out. I really appreciate your support of both the video and the workbook. I really, she's really like my co-author, the person who put the book together did an amazing job. My assistant, Katie, who I love. Shout out to Katie for putting all that work into the book. Really made it a very accessible, like beautiful. I'm really kind of pleased with it, how it came out. I am writing another book that's more about my experience in therapy, but I also wanted to give you guys something tangible. I will put one last time to put the book into the chat, as well as the video. If you're not interested in the book, the video is also something that I had a lot of fun putting together and incorporating the RRP concepts into that book. Yeah, that's all. And thank you so much for everyone who donated. That was very generous. I don't mean to skip that. I'm just reading and I'm kind of like watching the chat. So I very much appreciate you really supporting the channel. It goes a long way. And there's that. Yep. So I gotta run. I gotta go run to a thing. That's so vague. I gotta go run to a meeting for my child, and I'm gonna be a little bit late to it, but it was just like a little bit of a conflict kind of a thing. Like I gotta think about a thing. I love you all. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm gonna end the stream. Keep the chat going. If you can, make a comment in the live video. We really appreciate that. And I hope you have a great night. I want to be doing more of these. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. Love you all. Bye.